to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoy the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. Having started the principle of doing some video podcasts, I thought I'd continue that trend. The only difference is this week it's just me. So if you don't fancy that and fancy watching me for the next half an hour, then by all means watch or listen to the audio version of the podcast. There will be one in the normal Buzzsprout hosting site. And that'll be exactly as you've been used to for a good many episodes now. But I'm going to try and do most of my episodes on video from now on, as well as audio. So you'll have the opportunity to watch whatever suits you. And I know that some people are a bit more visual. They like to watch these things on video and see body language and expressions and so on. So if that's your thing, then really hope you enjoy it. But I would appreciate some feedback as well, because that would be really, really useful to get to know whether or not you think this is good and it's worthwhile and you're preferring it, or whether actually just the audio version is just fine for you. So this week I thought I'd do a thematic episode, and it's going to be kind of hard to do it without sounding like a bit of a grumpy old man and a bit of a Victor Meldrew for those that are in the UK and have watched the program One Foot in the Grave, because he is definitely a grumpy old man. Because I wanted to talk about the whole issue of altruism, politeness, behavior standards, really, because I think we're heading into a societal challenge with this. And there's a few instances I'll highlight, but I think the reason I wanted to talk about it is because I think for leaders, this is something that we need to focus on. If you're leading teams, if you're setting yourself out as something of an exemplar for this sort of thing, then actually you need to think about that. And one of the expressions that is out there quite a lot and used by quite a lot of people, and I completely subscribe to it, is the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And therefore walking past and tolerating behavior that is below par is not necessarily something that I think we should be doing. Now, I would caveat that by saying I absolutely recognize that there are some really big challenges to challenging behavior in public, particularly, depending on what it is, where it is, who's doing it, and so on. There are risk elements in today's society, unfortunately, that would probably cause people to think, do you know what? I'm not going to challenge that. And I would be in that camp. I would absolutely be in that camp. There are some things where I would probably go, do you know what? This is not a hill worth dying on. I'm not going to turn around and make a real fuss about something, because the risk of actually being attacked or just abused in some way is just not worth it. So I do understand why people might be a bit reticent, but at the same time, I think it's incumbent on everyone to start thinking about how we address this as society. And there's the shocking, whether it's a statistic or just one of those statements that's out there, thing that was recently being talked about, particularly in the UK, that your average boy growing up these days is more likely to have a smartphone than have a father living at home. If that's true, and I don't know, I can't quantify that, that is a horrifying statistic, because obviously at the end of the day, that means that not only have a lot of people, a lot of kids in particular, are growing up without father figures in their lives, and that's a challenge. But it also means that they're being unduly influenced by those devices and the stuff they can get off those devices. And as we all know, that is not necessarily giving them great role model behavior for them to follow. So I think there are some things to think about. There are some things to address. I've had a couple of incidents recently, just today actually, where I was out walking the dogs. I walk on an old disused railway line very regularly. That's now a lovely path. That's a shared space for cyclists, runners, walkers, etc. And you get lots of cyclists when you're walking dogs who are super polite. They're really lovely. And I tend to pull the dogs to the side, and I'll stop and let them go past. And they say thanks very much, and they're always very nice. And similarly, when they're coming from behind you, rather than surprising you, they're ringing a bell or they're shouting or whatever, and they're giving you some kind of warning. But twice today, I had bikes go past me who weren't like that. And they were just very, very focused, headphones in, head down. I'm going flat out. I don't give a monkeys about you. I'm just going to go do my thing. And one of those was head on, which was probably less problematic because at least I could see him coming. The other one was from behind me, which was much more problematic when you've got dogs on leads and the risk of obviously the dogs crossing in front of the cycle at the wrong time, etc. I use it just as an example because I think there's lots of this kind of behavior that you see, and some of it involves bikes, some of it involves walkers, some of it involves runners, some of it involves people with dogs. I mean, who are doing stuff that is ridiculous, and some of it is just general lack of politeness. And I think we've kind of lost our way a little bit, where we used to have much more respect for pretty much everyone in society, and certainly authority figures in society, whether they were teachers, whether they were policemen, whether they were emergency services, other than police. They would attract a lot of support from pretty much everybody. And I remember as a kid growing up, that was firmly the way it was. Whereas now I think it's a much, much more challenging environment for that. And people are generally not as respectful. In fact, overtly not so. I mean, in schools, I think teachers these days have a really challenging time with lots of kids, partly because back to they're afraid to intervene because they're afraid of the consequences potentially some of the time. They've got less vehicles to intervene with, less tools. And I grew up in an era of corporal punishment in schools. That's obviously long gone. I'm not condoning that. I'm not saying we should bring it back, certainly not. But I think it gave the teachers more opportunity to to kind of induce discipline because you knew that that was obviously a threat. The fact that some of those threats have gone now and those issues makes it more challenging for them to to bring up kids, and also the kids themselves, of course, and not just kids. I mean, people in wider society are much more savvy about their rights and they're basically we're in a situation now where it's almost feels like you can accuse somebody of something and it's up to them to prove they are innocent as opposed to you proving they're guilty. And that I don't think is a great metric either in terms of the way we've gone. So I think we need a bit of a ideally a bit of a societal reset. That's going to be quite hard to do. But as leaders, I definitely think there is an opportunity to start shaping this in your teams, in your organizations, in your family potentially as well. Just, being quite clear about, these are standards that I want to uphold. These are standards that I think are important. And, we should be doing some of this stuff. And it, it's all sorts of different things. It's whether you're holding doors open for people, whether you're turning around and making sure you're being super polite and stepping out of the way, and giving seats up for people that obviously need seats on public transport. Those kind of things, which have it just seemed to me to have disappeared recently. I mean, and it's not just the last few months; it's the last few years that I've really noticed a change with some of this. I mean, again, I was getting off an underground train in London fairly recently on a trip, and self-evidently, the normal rule is let people off the train before you try and get on the train. And there was this young guy, headphones in, standing right in the when the doors opened on the train, and he just basically stood there and effectively tried to barge his way into the train without waiting for anybody to get off, which is clearly crazy. I mean, at the end of the day, there's more space on the train once people have got off, so therefore let them off and then get on the train. And it's just that kind of complete lack of any kind of moral compass or emotional intelligence that puts you in a good space for this. So, I think it's one of those things that I hope everyone listening to this will kind of get it and go, yeah, yeah, you're probably right, and we need to do some more about that. And what I want to do is kind of give you a bit of a well, just have a think about that in your life. What are you doing? Not necessarily yourself. I mean, I sincerely hope that, in many instances, you'll be able to turn around and go, no, I role model the right behavior. I do all the right stuff and I'm good at this. And that's fine. If you do that, that's terrific. But what are you then doing in terms of developing other people that work around you that that what are you doing about tolerating behavior when when you do see stuff going wrong and do you intervene? Do you stop stuff happening, or do you just let it slide? Because I think, and again, it's one of the things I do when I train people quite a lot. I talk a bit about what you do as a leader and the kind of role model behavior that you might exhibit yourself and the standards you set out, that's all well and good. But you have to absolutely demonstrate that. If you see stuff happening that you just walk by or ignore and try and turn a blind eye to it, people will notice that you were doing that. People will notice that you have effectively just ignored the problem. And probably, not definitely, but probably they're going to turn around and go, well, you're tacitly approving of it then, because that's the message you're sending, that effectively you're saying, okay, it's okay to speak to someone like that or to behave like that or whatever the particular thing is that's going on, because you didn't actually do anything about it at the time when you had an opportunity to do that. And I would challenge you to think hard about how you manage that. Now, it may well be that you take the view that actually, do you know what? I want to deal with that privately. I saw it, I didn't like it. I'm going to get that individual in and I'm actually going to turn around and do something about it with them. And that may be entirely appropriate. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I think what you also need to think about is how do you then communicate to anybody that's actually in the wider team who's seen that behavior and who won't necessarily know that you've done anything about it? How do you get that message out there that it wasn't tolerated and it was, dealt with in a way that people can recognize as having closed the loop and it's been handled? Because I think that is important. And there are occasions when I think you need not just a private discussion with someone about their behavior. You actually need a public discussion where you potentially do turn around and take someone to task in public about their behavior and what they've actually done, because that will send a very clear message, not just to that individual, of course, but also to the wider group about what's acceptable and what's not. Because if you are seen to do this sort of stuff, of course it becomes more pervasive. And one of the things, again, I talk about potentially training a lot of the time is the corrosive nature of mobile phones in the kind of training environment, where, and not just train meetings generally, where if people get their phone out and they put it on the desk, and particularly if they've got it face up, but even if they've got it face down, it then vibrates on the desk or something. People then go, "Ooh, we need to look at it." And once one person does that, other people start thinking it's acceptable to do that. And pretty soon you've got everyone doing it, which is just very, very disruptive, very distracting in any kind of environment, particularly one where you're trying to train people. So again, thinking about how am I going to handle this? What ground rules am I going to set? What kind of tolerance am I going to put? And I think you need to do that up front in that kind of environment. You need to be very clear about these are the things I actually expect people to do, and these are the things I don't expect people to do. And another one of these, hot topics that's around in the same sort of space is timeliness. We seem to have lost our way a little bit with people expecting that, your time is just, it's not that valuable. It can turn up late, and it doesn't matter. I can be late for a virtual meeting. I can roll into a physical meeting late without any apology. Even worse, I can roll into a physical meeting late and holding a new cup of coffee that I've just been waiting at the coffee machine to get. Think from your own personal point of view, if you are in the habit of doing any of those sorts of things, what kind of signal are you sending to the people that are in that room? What are they going to think about you? And I know that some cultures are much more tolerant of this and have a kind of completely different perspective. Well, fine. But if you're in a multicultural environment, you've got to respect the other culture side of this as well. And you are holding up other people, and basically being slightly disrespectful of their time. Certainly, whoever's running the room, whether it's somebody who's chairing a meeting or facilitating a session or whatever it happens to be, you're certainly disrespecting their time. And equally, if you're the person who is running the room or you're the person that's in the room just as a participant, what are you doing about it? How are you actually communicating your displeasure or not about this? If you're just laissez-faire about it, you don't care, well, all right, fair enough. That may be your style, and you just have to live with that. But if you actually want something done about it and it's a frustration, do you actually say anything to people? Do you take them on one side privately and go, do you know what? We had that conversation about being timely for the meetings, and you're not, and you turned up today again late, and again with a cup of coffee in your hand, that kind of thing. So I just think, think about it. And I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying I'm whiter than white here at all. I certainly do not do everything that I'm preaching to you myself all the time. There are plenty of occasions when I go, do you know what? I'm just going to tolerate that. I don't consider it's my place to turn around and challenge that kind of behavior. And particularly if I'm working in someone else's organization and training a group of people, then it's interesting to observe the kind of culture that's there. But at the same time, do I actually want to actively intervene and make a point about it? Yeah, if it's serious enough, but not if it's not that serious. Probably not. But so you have to feel your way a little bit, and I think that's another sort of emotional intelligence aspect. You need to be considering what kind of behavior you're going to tolerate, what kind of behavior you're not going to tolerate in that sort of space. But it goes to a bigger thing as well in terms of behavior and approaches that I think is starting to be a bit corrosive in society generally, where are we paying enough attention some of the time to the kind of people that are working with us and around us? Are we just wrapped up in our own little world, our own bubble with our earphones in and our phone out? Time and again, when I walk around in London, for example, I see people all the time who are literally just glued to a phone while they're walking along the street, bumping into a lamppost almost literally, or getting run over by walking out into the road. The I've seen it in restaurants where people are doing the same thing, and it all plays to this kind of we don't really care enough about other people, and we are being selfish. We're being disrespectful, being impolite. And I just think it's one of those things that maybe just look at your own behavior a little bit, moderate what you do, think about, okay, do I actually create some space where I'm not doing that, definitively not doing that? I'm leaving my devices out of this room, or and I'm going to firmly be actively listening to what's going on and paying real attention. Am I looking at the kind of behaviors as a real role model that I want to exhibit? When I'm sat down on a train and somebody gets on, do I actually say, well, do you know what, would you like a seat? And we seem to have got into this crazy position where people are worried about some of these historic polite behaviors because they're worried they're going to turn around and someone's going to be upset that actually you've offered them a seat. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you should do it in any kind of inappropriate way or use language that is inappropriate. But at the same time, you can offer someone something very politely. If they turn it down, then they turn it down. Fine, that's all right. But at least you've done it. I do think, by the way, occasionally it has happened to me where I've held a door open for someone and they've basically either just walked through it and completely not acknowledged me, or worse is actually where they turn around and actively go, why'd you do that? I don't want you to do that. Well, I mean, kind of just being polite, mate. So what? Doesn't matter. It's not affecting your life, is it? And I just think we're just in that sort of space, which grates with me. I don't know. Be interested in your feedback on this. I mean, I think am I just going off on one here, or is it something that actually is grating with you as well? Because if it is grating with you as well, and you're in a leadership role, and kind of everybody is in a leadership role to some extent in terms of the way we behave in society and the kind of stuff we tolerate, and the kind of stuff we do, then think about, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? How are you going to intervene? Is it appropriate to intervene? And and I go back to the be careful about this. In the kind of wider society where people that have nothing to do with you out in the street or whatever, intervention is a challenging thing. I've been on the tube one time in London a long time ago now, where I was sat next to a woman who started remonstrating with this group of youths who'd got on the train and had a ghetto blaster and were making a lot of noise. There was a lot of swearing. It was really, it was pretty unpleasant. But she was giving them a really, really hard time. And I was kind of sitting there cringing a little bit, going, oh no, because if this really kicks off, I'm going to have to intervene here and it could end really messily. And luckily, they all got off at the next stop. So, crisis averted, woman then calms down, sits down, etc. So some people, you need to think about the consequences potentially of your action. And I'm not suggesting you go over the top with it, but I do think within areas that you control and with teams of people that you control and your own personal behavior, what are you doing is worth just a little cross check to think about. Am I in the right space with everything I'm doing here, or am I perhaps falling into that same trap of being a bit lazy about this, a bit impolite about it, a bit selfish about it, where actually, I could actually do a bit more. I could think about how I create the opportunities for people, how I, offer up advice to people, whether share things with people that I would otherwise not do, the way I speak to people, the way I behave, my own kind of small little traits, all these little things, all these little sort of minute little things add up in terms of the perception that people have of you as a leader, the kind of little things that you do in the way you actually act each day. One of the things I regularly say to people as well, I've said it on podcasts previously, is two of the most underutilized words in the English language in the same sentence are thank and you, because I think we don't thank people enough. We've lost that skill as well. We're not writing notes to people in the same way we used to. People might turn around and send out some kind of generic email, thank you to their team. Well, great, but it's not very personal. Just think about, how you actually land that message more personally, bring the whole emotional intelligence things to the fore here, and actually really start caring about those individuals that work for you. Because if you do that, guess what? You'll get rewarded for it. They will really love it if you do that. If you're actually showing a genuine interest in them as people, if you're showing you've got behavioral traits that are the right ones, and you're actually are not you risk. I know in everything I'm saying here, you risk being perceived as old school, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But actually, I think there are some of these old school behaviors, if you like, that actually were really good ones, and we're at risk of just losing some of that. So that's kind of where I wanted to get to with this episode. I think the we're not going to solve this in a single stroke for sure, because I think there are some really big challenges in terms of trying to move the super tanker that is human behavior into a different space. But when you look at the youngsters growing up and coming into society today, have they got the right kind of role models? If they haven't, how can you help potentially to add some role model kind of behavior into the mix? Mentoring, support, coaching, providing them opportunities, thinking about ways you can actually develop them to give them a kind of different way of thinking, because that is good behavior that is going to help people to actually genuinely change, to genuinely fit in and be part of the team. We talk regularly. I did it on the very last podcast that I did with Jonathan Bowman Perks. We talked about intergenerational working and the kind of views of you looking at younger generations across the ages, really, as being, yeah, they're not as good as we were, they're different to we were, all the rest of it. I don't subscribe to that necessarily at all. I think they're different, usually generation to generation, and they bring different perspectives. But some of what I'm talking about isn't just about young people at all. In fact, a lot of it is about old people. If I look at the way that some people, and I'm no spring chicken now, but if I look at the way that some people drive, for example, and older people in cars, they are incredibly inconsiderate and incredibly impolite. So it's firmly not a generational thing in terms of just looking down at younger generations. This applies across the board, where just do a mental check-in on your own behavior. What do you want? What do you think good? And write yourself a list if you need to. Turn around and think, okay, what's my list look like? Am I happy with that? Just test myself a little bit on what kind of behavior is really great with me, and do I actually do any of those same things myself? Because I bet you do. I bet you there's a good chance that you'll turn around and write a list of things that really hack you off, and you'll go, yeah, occasionally I do some of those as well. So it's weeding those out a little bit, finding an opportunity to generally build your team in the right direction, role model the right behaviors, set the right kind of conditions for the behaviors you want to see in the team, what you're prepared to tolerate, what you're not prepared to tolerate, being really clear about gray areas versus red lines. I mean, most people are going to have some red lines in terms of behavior. When people tread over those red lines, what do you do about it? If the answer is nothing, then it's not a red line. You need to think about, right, when this behavior goes beyond the pale, how am I actually going to demonstrate that it was a red line? I really did care about it, and I'm actually going to do something really positive about it. Because you need to. You absolutely need to. You can't afford to be in a position as a leader where you just tacitly ignore or even actively ignore behavior like that, because what will happen is other people will notice it. They will just look at you as potentially, weak would be an obvious word that would spring to mind, indecisive, double standards, if they perceive that you're behaving in a different way to different people within the team, etc. And you really don't want to be in that space. You want to be firmly in the space of people feeling that you're a very appropriately disciplined, authentic in yourself, focused on what your standards are, applying those standards, being a role model, being consistent as a role model. So you're not got double standards with different people in the team. Team favorites is another thing I tend to talk about a lot, but I talk about it in a different context from the point of view of people's work ethic and using people too much some of the time and other people you're not using at all. But that applies in the same way to having people that you behave differently to, unconscious biases, if you like, where you are looking at somebody or a group of people within your organization and you're handling them differently to another group of people within your organization. Whether that's a gender thing, a race thing, or whatever, it doesn't make any difference. None of that is acceptable. You have to be even-handed in the way that you actually work with people, obviously, and you want them to feel that they're cared about and they are respected and they are a part of the team. I think that's enough, probably. I'm sorry if there's a bit of repetition in there somewhere, but I wanted to have a bit of a little bit of a stream of consciousness, a little bit of a rant, because I do think it is something that we have got wrong at the minute. We need to think as leaders, what is our role in terms of resetting society a little bit to where we want it to be? Now, different people will want different things. Fine. I'm not suggesting everyone's going to have an absolute, sort of one specific standard and that's what's going to get applied. Some people will be a lot more tolerant, lenient, whatever you like. Some people will be a bit more disciplinarian about it. Some people won't care at all. And none of those are wrong. I'm not suggesting that they're wrong, but I think we need to just have a bit of a check-in about what is good about the way that we're tolerating behaviors in society and what isn't good. When you see behaviors in shops or when you see behaviors in with customer service people, do you actually, just walk on by and leave that be? I had an incident a while ago when I was actually at the ticket desk, not the check-in desk for one of the major airlines. And I was right behind a guy who was absolutely lambasting this poor woman that was behind the desk for something that clearly wasn't her fault. He was just venting because he was angry about something had gone wrong with his ticket and he, had flight connection problems and all that sort of thing. But his behavior was utterly unacceptable. And I told him so. I literally interrupted and I said, I'm really sorry, but I'm listening to your conversation. This poor lady, you've brought her almost to the verge of tears here because of your behavior towards her. Do you think that's acceptable? Because I certainly don't. And he looked at me, and you could tell he was kind of, now luckily, 6'1", reasonably big bloke. I'm probably not likely to get knocked down for that kind of comment. But at the same time, it made him think, and I watched him change his attitude, and he realized, yeah, sorry, red mist descended. I was beyond the pale. So all I'm saying with this is do have that kind of check-in. What am I thinking about? What am I prepared to tolerate? What do I want from my team? How's that all going to work? I hope that's really useful. As I say, trying to do more of these things on video now. So if you're still watching this, you haven't been scared off, then great. Uh, as I always say at the end of these podcasts these days, if you're finding what I do valuable, then I really, really would appreciate you going to support the show. The link in the podcast platform that you're on, if you're watching or listening to this on the audio side, or go to patreon.com, www.patreon.com/leading for life. And then you can find the opportunity to support the show, be a champion of the show, be a patron of the show, because for less than the price of a cup of coffee at the bottom end of that scale, you can make a very, very big difference to the way this show continues to run, because it doesn't run itself. It takes a lot of time. There's quite a lot of physical costs and bits that are involved in it as well. And just think of it as a bit of a subscription. If you're thinking that this is something that you'll buy as a magazine in the shop or as some kind of article, then just maybe it's worth you putting some financial support into the podcast as well, and that would be really, really kind. Either way, though, I'm enjoying having good listeners and good feedback, and please contribute to that. Please like it if you're watching on YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on the audio version, do the same things, comment on it, share it, push it around so more people get to watch it and benefit from it. That would be really, really kind. I'll be back with some more guest stuff next week, and really look forward to doing that with you. But until then, all the very best. Bye now.